For more than 100 years, two giants have been locked in a rivalry so intense, you'd think they were fighting over the last slice of pizza. On one side, the legendary Coca-Cola, the drink that practically invented modern branding. On the other side, Pepsi, the challenger that refused to stay in second place. People used to call it the Cola Wars, but honestly, at this point, it feels more like a billion-dollar soap opera. But today's question is simple. Did Pepsi really overcome Coca-Cola after a whole century of chasing it? Or is this another one of those rumors the internet loves creating, like claiming the earth is flat, or that pineapple belongs on pizza? Before we reveal the answer, let's rewind a bit. Not too far though, no need to visit dinosaurs. Just enough to understand how we got here. It all began in the late 1800s. Coca-Cola appeared first, in 1886. Back then, Coke came in pharmacies and was sold as a magical drink that could cure headaches, fatigue, sadness, and probably heartbreak too. There were no TikTok trends, no social media ads, just a syrupy drink served with confidence. People tasted it and went, "Wow, this slaps." Pepsi came along a few years later. In 1893, a pharmacist named Caleb Bradham created what he proudly named Brad's Drink. Yes, Brad's Drink. Imagine walking into a store today and asking for a cold bottle of Brad. Good luck with that. A few years later, he changed the name to Pepsi Cola. And thank God he did, because Brad's Drink versus Coca-Cola doesn't sound like a global rivalry. It sounds like two kids selling juice in the neighborhood. But here's the thing. Pepsi didn't start as Coke's equal. Not even close. Coca-Cola had already started establishing itself. They were building factories, setting up distribution, and creating a brand identity long before anyone took Pepsi seriously. Pepsi was like the kid in high school who wants to sit with the cool kids, but nobody even knows his name yet. Then the first big shock came. Pepsi went bankrupt. Twice. Not once, twice. Coca-Cola was dominating so hard that Pepsi couldn't keep up. Imagine that. Today, Pepsi is a global empire, but back then they were struggling to pay bills. But something interesting happened. A company bought Pepsi after one of its bankruptcies and gave it a second chance. And this time, Pepsi was smarter. They didn't try to copy Coca-Cola. They went for something bold, something daring, something that would change the game. They cut the price. Yep, Pepsi became the big 5-cent bargain. For the same price as one small Coke, you could get a big Pepsi. And trust me, in the 1930s, that mattered. People didn't have money to throw around. So they looked at the two options and said, why pay more when I can get more sugar for less? Pepsi started rising. Coca-Cola noticed. Their executives probably spit out their drinks in shock during meetings. By the 1940s, Pepsi had become the clever underdog. Their ads were catchy, their prices attractive, and their audience young. Meanwhile, Coca-Cola stayed more traditional. Coke was the drink of the entire world. Pepsi was the drink of the cool kids. Then the battles got wild. Taste tests began. You've probably heard of the famous Pepsi challenge. Pepsi set up tables in malls. People were blindfolded and told to taste two colas. Most of them chose Pepsi. Coca-Cola executives panicked. They launched something called New Coke, which turned out to be one of the biggest disasters in business history. People hated it so much that Coca-Cola had to apologize and bring back the original formula. For a moment, it looked like Pepsi might actually become number one. They hired Michael Jackson, then Britney Spears, then Beyoncé. Their ads were flashy, loud, energetic, everything young people loved. Coca-Cola kept their classic, nostalgic, family-friendly vibe. Both sides had strengths. Both sides had weaknesses. But here's where the twist begins. Around the 1990s and early 2000s, Coca-Cola started focusing less on being the cool kid and more on becoming a global powerhouse. They expanded into every country they could reach. They built bottling plants everywhere. They invested heavily in distribution. If you walked into a remote village and found electricity, chances are you'd also find Coca-Cola. Pepsi focused more on branding, celebrities, entertainment, and the American market. Both strategies worked, but Coca-Cola's worked better. Today, Coca-Cola is still the world's most popular soft drink. It has a larger market share, more global distribution, and stronger brand loyalty. If we only talk about cola drinks, Coca-Cola remains number one. If we talk about the company's overall, it gets more interesting because PepsiCo owns giant snack brands like Doritos, Lay's, Cheetos, and more. That gives them massive revenue outside beverages. But cola to cola, Coca-Cola still leads. So, did Pepsi really overcome Coca-Cola after a whole century of chasing it? Well, yes and no. If someone only compares the cola drinks, Pepsi didn't surpass Coca-Cola. Coke is still the king of cola. But something huge happened recently that most people don't know. PepsiCo, as a whole company, became larger in size, revenue, and product variety than Coca-Cola. Pepsi isn't just a beverage company, it is a food and beverage giant. While Coca-Cola focuses on drinks, PepsiCo plays in two massive industries, beverages and snacks. This means PepsiCo earns more total money worldwide than Coca-Cola. Not because their cola beat Coca-Cola's cola, but because their snack brands are unbeatable. So you could say Pepsi changed the battlefield. Instead of trying to beat Coke in cola, they expanded to other areas and won the war in a different way. But let's slow down. This story isn't finished. The reason people think Pepsi has finally beaten Coca-Cola is because the company as a whole, meaning snacks and drinks combined, became financially bigger than Coca-Cola. But if the argument is strictly about the cola battle, Coke still sits on the throne and doesn't look like it's moving anytime soon. Still, Pepsi didn't give up. They evolved. They went from a struggling soda brand to a global giant. Kind of like the kid no one noticed at school, who later becomes a millionaire. But here's something interesting. Even though Coke is still the number one cola, Pepsi has mastered something Coke still struggles with, adapting to young consumers. Pepsi's branding keeps evolving. Pepsi's identity keeps refreshing. Pepsi sounds more fun, more modern, more energetic. Coca-Cola sounds timeless, classic, and nostalgic. Two different personalities fighting in the same arena. Let's break down how Pepsi did what many thought was impossible. When Pepsi introduced the Pepsi Challenge, it cracked Coca-Cola's confidence. It proved that in blind taste tests, ordinary people preferred Pepsi's sweetness. Even if Coca-Cola still dominated sales, Pepsi's marketing won the psychological battle. Suddenly, Pepsi wasn't the second-place drink anymore. It was the bold challenger. Then Pepsi did something even cleverer. They signed the biggest celebrities of every generation. Michael Jackson moonwalked for Pepsi. Beyoncé danced for Pepsi. Britney Spears sang for Pepsi. For decades, Pepsi stayed in the spotlight of pop culture. Coca-Cola went for a different approach. Their strength wasn't celebrities. It was storytelling, holidays, family, happiness, that warm feeling of tradition. These two strategies shaped the rivalry for decades. Now let's talk about the moment everyone thinks Pepsi finally overtook Coca-Cola, the snack empire. PepsiCo bought Frito-Lay, a strategic move that changed everything. Chips plus cola, popcorn plus cola, snacks plus cola. It's perfect. Imagine watching a movie with a bag of chips but no drink. Not happening. PepsiCo understood that if they couldn't beat Coca-Cola in cola, they could win in the snacks people eat alongside cola. A genius move. They weren't fighting Coca-Cola head-on anymore. They were expanding the battlefield into a territory Coke wasn't prepared for. That's like challenging someone to a boxing match, losing, then saying, okay, let's arm wrestle instead, and winning so hard the opponent forgets how boxing even works. This is why, in total revenue, PepsiCo is ahead today. But that brings us back to the real question people love asking. After 100 years of rivalry, who really won? If you ask Coca-Cola fans, they'll say Coke won. If you ask Pepsi fans, they'll say Pepsi won. If you ask people who don't care, they'll probably say, who cares? Just give me cold water. But the truth is more interesting. It's not a simple yes or no. The answer depends on which battlefield you're looking at. In cola, Coca-Cola still leads. In total revenue, PepsiCo is bigger. In global brand recognition, Coca-Cola is still number one. In product diversity, PepsiCo dominates. In cultural influence, both are powerful in their own ways. But here is what almost nobody talks about. Pepsi didn't need to beat Coca-Cola in cola anymore. They realized that chasing Coke for a full century was holding them back. So they shifted the fight. They created a new field, and they won there. And here's the twist you've been waiting for. Everyone thinks Pepsi versus Coca-Cola is about cola. But the real battle is something much bigger. Who controls the world's food and drink choices? Coca-Cola controls drinks. Pepsi controls drinks and snacks. This rivalry isn't about who has better taste. It's about who has better strategy. Coca-Cola stayed king by staying focused. Pepsi became a giant by expanding wide. Two different paths. Two different victories. So when people ask, did Pepsi finally overcome Coca-Cola after 100 years? The true answer is, Pepsi didn't beat Coca-Cola. They outgrew the race. And Coca-Cola didn't lose. They mastered their throne. The cola wars never ended. They simply evolved. And here's the part that surprises most people. The only real winner in this rivalry is the consumer. Because without this competition, we wouldn't have half the choices we enjoy today. No wild marketing, no memorable ads, no endless flavors, no innovations, just boring soda. So the next time you grab a cold drink, remember, you're holding a piece of a 100-year-old battle. A battle with no single winner, just two giants constantly pushing each other. And who knows, maybe one day a new challenger will rise. Maybe not. But if that ever happens, you'll hear it here.